guys. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 12, Active Reading Strategies. As I'm sure many of you have already figured out, college entails a lot of reading. And so here's some strategies that we're going to talk about that might just make it a little bit more effective for you. This is an activity I always start with the class, so you're welcome to pause the video and try it out yourself. The first thing I would have students do is read this as fast as you can. The goal is to get through reading it before anybody else. And then I would ask the class what the procedure is describing. Is specifically describing a task that we do pretty regularly. Very few. I think I've had one in my years that I've actually been able to tell through the speed reading. So then we try it again, and I leave it up, and everybody has as much time as they need. And more often than not, most of the class can figure out the second time. And the reason is two key differences. One, they have the time to read through it, right? Go back and reread it, whatever they need to do. And also, I've given them some direction. They know that they are looking for something specific out of this text, and they're not just reading it for the sake of reading it. And those are things that we can apply to our college reading. See if you can figure out the task. All right, so you have different types of reading in college. This is no surprise. Of course, you have textbooks, and you'll probably notice some are written very differently than others. Some are written to be really high level, use a lot of complicated words and jargon that they frustrate me as well, that sometimes we have to go back and reread. Sometimes we have to look up words. And then you're going to have other textbooks that are written for the average reader, written for those of us that are learning the material and not already experts in the material. You also have articles, which are huge if you're doing any sort of research paper. You can use news articles, but you also have academic articles. And if you remember from our library presentation, you can use a library databases and you can pull these. Academic articles are ones that were written by a researcher or an academic. They did a study maybe, they compiled a bunch of research. Then it has to go through a peer review process through other academics. So a content expert put together something, put together this article, and then other content experts all had to approve it before it could get published. So it just gives it a lot more weight than even your news articles. You know that the information is reliable. You know that everything has been vetted, as opposed to an article somebody published on their blog, let's say. Then, of course, you have literature. You'll probably see these a lot in your English courses. Short stories, novels, drama, poetry, things of that nature. And then nonfiction books, which you might use, again, for research purposes. You might use an autobiography, something of that nature. So we say if you can, write in your book. So if you can underline, circle key terms, that'll be a good way when you go back to study and you're compiling those master set of notes like we talked about from your note-taking lecture, an easy way to go back through that information without having to reread the entire text. That being said, I know a lot of us, I know myself, used to buy books so I could turn around and sell them as soon as the class was done and try to get back as much money as I could. So totally understand that. I used Post-its, which you'll see on the slide, and I made my notes in the Post-its, and then I put them on the page where I needed to go back and reference. So you can get creative with your note-taking, but you should have a note-taking strategy throughout while you're reading the text, whether it's underlining and circling key terms or writing on Post-its or something else that works for you. When you read some text, write a brief summary either in the margins on a piece of paper that you can put in the book. Again, the Post-it notes, something that will help you kind of elaborate. Because remember from our memory lecture and our note-taking, elaboration is the best way to really get that information, to really make sure we understand that information, and then to start building it into our long-term memory. And then you can also create mind maps. Again, this is going back to that note-taking lecture that we talked about last week. Reading the text and then going back, pulling those key concepts and creating a mind map out of them. So it's a better way for you to understand that information. Of course, read when you're fully awake. I think we've all been guilty of trying to read something right before we go to bed and falling asleep before we finished it. We all have different times when we are most active with mainly our brain. when we just can synthesize information better. I know I work better like late mornings and early afternoons is my best times. Those are going to be different for you. So figure out those best times that you would be more engaged in the reading, times that you're not just drained if you can, you're not going to be easily distracted. Read with that pen or highlighter in your hand so that you can mark that text as we talked about. Interact with the idea. So this goes back to the summarizing. Ask questions and answer them. If there's questions at the end of the text, can you answer them after you finished your reading? Of course, paraphrase, and that's that elaboration piece we talked about. And then, however, you can make personal connections. Can you take this reading and connect it to a memory you have or to a person you know? That is going to strengthen that memory process and that understanding process if you can somehow incorporate it to something that makes sense in your life. All right, so this is just a longer way to think about, remember the CRAP system, C-R-A-A-P. You want to think about when you're looking at this information, what is the context it was written in? Who was the intended audience? A lot of your textbooks, you are the intended audience. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes they were written for other academics, and that's going to make that writing a little bit more complicated to go through, and you might want to have more time for that writing. What was their purpose? Was it entertaining to explain? Definitely you want to know if it's to persuade and what you think about that. How is it organized? Is it something that can help you as you read through it? Their tone. Is it lighthearted? Is it serious? And then what tools do they use to accomplish their purpose? So this is important, especially if you're using, let's say, an article for a research purpose. Are they using facts and figures and direct quotes? That's all okay. Personal experience is fine, but do they have anything else to back it up? Do you have other literature to back it up, or is it just their personal experience and it's kind of the exception? You can use all those in the paper, but you have to be able to explain that. And then what's their thesis? What is their main argument or idea? That's going to be key for you to know if you're doing a research project and you're going through several articles, get to the thesis, and that will tell you if the article is something that you can use or if you need to move on and find more articles to help develop your arguments. All right, so this is an activity to help you make your reading more effective. The first thing we want you to do is go through and survey the reading, develop some questions that you can answer while you're reading it, do the actual reading, then go through and recite as much as you can. And then again, if it's a textbook and there's maybe some questions at the end of the chapter, use those. Can you answer those questions and go back through the reading? And then you're going to want to review, right? Moving things through our memory requires a lot of repetition, which we know. Doesn't mean rereading the chapter a bunch of times. It means following these steps and then going back and reviewing those key terms, reviewing notes that you made, highlighting sections, or did you use Post-its, reviewing all of that. You want to pace yourself. So I always recommend break it up. Try not to set aside 3 hours to read 10 chapters. You're going to get into speed reading. Your brain's going to break. It's going to get tired. You've read the same chapter 3 times and you still can't say what's in it at all. Pace yourself. Read just kind of like we talked about with studying, smaller chunks of time, and then make sure you have enough time to go back through it, review it, make your notes. Schedule your reading. This goes back to our time management. You should have on your calendar time just set aside for school. And maybe it's Monday, Wednesday, Fridays from 3 to 8 is study time, because that's what works with your work schedule and your school schedule. And that can include reading. That can include doing assignments, things like that. Have it on your calendar, because it's really easy to forget or to get distracted and I'll do it tomorrow, and then now it's test day. Get yourself in the right space, and that can be physically or mentally. If you read better in the quiet, then make sure that all your distractions are silenced. If you need to go somewhere like the library, do that. If you need, I like to sit on the porch and read. I can't have it too quiet, but I can't have it too loud. And so that's always a fun trying to find my reading space. What is it that works for you? Some people read with music, some people cannot. Know that about yourself and get that right space. Same thing, mentally clear out as much as that you can so you can focus on the reading. What can you set aside? Of course, our cell phones should be, off and set aside, whatever you can do for that. Think critically before you highlight. So go back to our critical thinking. Think about questions. This is part of the SQ3R. When you're thinking of questions, think of those critical thinking questions we kind of talked over in that chapter. What do you want to know about this? What can you uncover about this? When you survey it, that will help you come up with some of those questions. This part is really, really important. 15 to 25%, that's how much you should be highlighting. Anything more than that and you're just coloring in the chapter, and then when you go back and read it, you're just going to see a lot of color but not a lot of key concepts. So 15 to 25% of what you read is about how much you should be highlighting. And then of course, after you've read a note, put a note. After you've read, put a note. Why is it important? Why did you highlight it? So that you'll remember. Think about our forgetting curve and how quickly we forget information. So if you did your reading and you made your notes and then it's 2 days later that you're looking at it, you're going to have to remember some of it. You've lost some of it, right? So make those notes that'll help that memory move a little bit faster. And then of course, annotate your reading material. Paraphrase it, summarize it. What does it mean? All right, reading online is trickier. It's becoming more and more of a thing. Of course, our textbook is online, so that's not new for this class. But you will see a lot of this as we, in higher ed in general, we're trying to use more free resources, and those are always going to be online. So you will probably be reading more and more online. So where it's possible, you can download it into a PDF. So you can read it offline. One thing that I do with my school right now with my articles, I download it as a PDF into my Google Drive, and then my device, I put make available offline, so then I can read it anywhere on that device. Or if you can download it obviously as a PDF and read it offline. Google Drive has just also added tools so that you can highlight a PDF that you have saved in your Google Drive and it will save it for you. This is a new thing and I'm super excited about it. You can also get apps that will help you disable social media. So if you're on a tablet or your phone trying to do your reading and you keep getting, notifications, Snapchats, whatever, you can either go through individually and turn them all off or get an app that will turn them off for you. Adjust your screen, whatever you need to do. If you need, I have a phone and then I have a tablet, and I take my tablet for my reading and I take it to the gym when I can because I hate doing cardio, and it's big enough and I can put it on, let's say the treadmill, and it's easier for me to read than my phone. That's something that works for me, whatever it's going to do to help you see that screen. You can install, there's different extensions that you can install. Like I said, Google Drive has a lot of this built in, which you already have access to as an ACC student. If that's not your fancy, that's fine. You can get different extensions, annotation tools that will help you highlight, make notes on the online text. You're just going to have to do a little bit of research for those. Still use the SQ3R system. So you still want to survey, come up with those questions, because as we learned in the activity, when we're looking for information, our reading becomes more meaningful than when we're just blind reading. And then, of course, recite and review. And then make sure if you're reading online, if you're doing, let's say, research for a paper, you get reputable online sources. The easiest thing to do with that is to use the library and use their databases. Those are academic databases that are used in pretty much every online library at every university. So you don't have to worry as much about the reputation. You're going to just get good resources using them. If you decide to use something Google Scholar, Google in general, you're just going to have to do a little bit more work, use that CRAP method, and make sure that you're getting good resources. Of course, you don't want to use something like Wikipedia as a relatable source, right? But you can use Wikipedia to get some background information to help you with your search to get to a reputable source, if that makes sense. It's just looking for that. But the easiest tool that you have for that is going to be the ACC library and the different databases they have that will just pull those articles for you. All right, guys, that's all I have on active reading. Thank you.